a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 4, Drunken Camera. British law will rule supreme. The government explains how it intends to override the power of Europe's Human Rights Court after it thwarted a migrant flight to Rwanda. Also, no strike today, but it was far from back to normal on the trains. Could we really be set for 6 months of industrial action on the rail network? Inflation hits a 40-year high, but some experts were braced actually for worse. If anything, might price rises be turning a corner? That's a hopeful question. And alongside me for the next hour and more, having her say on the stories of the day, the political commentator Sarah Elliott. And don't forget, you can have all your say, or have your say on the stories that we're talking about in the show. Email me at gbviews@gbnews. But first, the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just after 4 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The RMT says tomorrow's rail strike will go ahead after talks finish today without an agreement. The unions accuse Transport Secretary Grant Shapps of wrecking negotiations. The RMT says it'll continue with industrial action until it reaches a settlement over job security and pay. Just 60% of trains are running today, despite there being no official strike, with some operators ending services earlier than usual ahead of another strike tomorrow. Wiltshire police are investigating the death of a soldier who was killed during a training exercise on Salisbury Plain. The 26-year-old man sustained head injuries after he was involved in a collision with a Warrior armoured vehicle yesterday morning. He's been identified as a member of 5th Battalion, the Rifles. A national incident has been declared after polio was detected in sewage samples in London. The virus, which was officially eradicated in the UK in 2003, was discovered at a treatment works which serves 4 million people in the north and east of the capital. The UK Health Security Agency is urging members of the public to ensure their vaccines are up to date. While the risk of contamination is low, people are being warned the virus can cause paralysis and, in rare cases, be fatal. The Labour leader has gone head-to-head with the Prime Minister as voters prepare to go to the polls for 2 crucial by-elections. Sir Keir Starmer accused Boris Johnson of failing to prevent this week's national rail strikes by refusing to meet with unions and operators. As the country deals with the biggest walkout by train staff in 3 decades, the Labour leader said the Prime Minister is only interested in blaming everyone else.
The Prime Minister of this country and his Transport Secretary haven't attended a single meeting, held a conversation or lifted a finger to stop these strikes. So rather than blame everyone else, why doesn't he do his job, get round the table and get the trains running?
Boris Johnson responded by saying the Labour leader is in the pocket of the unions.
Strikes, as he knows, it is up to the railway companies to negotiate. That is their job. We know why he takes the line he does. We know why he won't condemn the strikes. We know why even now he hasn't got the gumption to call out his MPs who are going out to support the pickets, Mr. Speaker. The reason his authority is on the line in this matter is that they take £10 million from the unions, Mr. Speaker.
Inflation has hit its highest level in 40 years, climbing to 9.1% in May, up from 9% in April. The rising cost of food and non-alcoholic goods were the main driver, further squeezing household budgets. Last week, the Bank of England warned inflation was likely to peak at more than 11% in October. The Chancellor says the government is doing everything it can to reduce the figure.
I want people to be reassured that we have all the tools we need and the determination to reduce inflation and bring it back down. Firstly, the Bank of England will act forcefully to combat inflation. Secondly, the government will be responsible with borrowing and debt so we don't make the situation worse and drive up people's mortgage rates any more than they're going to go up. And lastly, we're improving the productivity of our economy, improving the supplies of energy we have and moving people off welfare into work.
The Deputy Prime Minister has outlined new legislation which gives the UK power to override rulings by the European Court of Human Rights. It's after the court blocked the first deportation flight carrying asylum seekers to Rwanda last week. Dominic Raab told MPs the UK's new Bill of Rights will place ultimate legal power in the hands of the UK's Supreme Court.
Mr. Speaker, next we will strengthen the separation of powers in this country, affirming the supremacy of the Supreme Court, being explicit that the UK courts are under no obligation to follow the Strasbourg case law and indeed are free to diverge from it. I'm proud of our world-beating judiciary. And what else is the point? What else is the point of a Supreme Court if it bows in subordination to a European one?
Glastonbury has officially opened after a 3-year break because of the pandemic. Traffic has been busy around the site in Somerset as thousands of festival goers opt to avoid train journeys. The event celebrating its 50th anniversary with acts including Ukraine's Eurovision Song Contest winners. And on Saturday, Sir Paul McCartney will become the oldest ever solo artist to headline the festival at 80 years of age. Looking forward to that. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Back to Colin.
Six minutes past 4. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has announced plans to introduce a Bill of British Rights. It will mean that decisions made by British judges will have supreme authority following a decision by the European Court of Human Rights to block the first flight of asylum seekers to Rwanda. Speaking to Parliament today, Dominic Raab asked what the point was of a British Supreme Court if it bows in subordination to a European one.
Mr. Speaker, our Bill of Rights will strengthen our proud tradition of freedom. It will demarcate a clearer separation of powers. It will ensure greater respect for our democratic institutions, and it will better protect the public and restore a healthy dose of common sense to the justice system, which is essential for commanding public confidence. Ultimately, it will make us freer, it will help keep our streets safer, and I commend this statement to the House.
Let's turn to Stephen Wolfe, who's the Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity and coincidentally a former QC. Actually, Stephen, could you ever be a former QC? Once you're QC, you're always a QC.
I'm sorry, Colin. I was never a QC, just a barrister. I don't want to get myself into trouble by the...
Well, you know the law anyway. You know the law. Which bit of what Dominic Raab had to say today caught your ear as a lawyer? Because the right to family life element, which has been so incendiary in recent years. You think of the difficulties of removing somebody like Abu Qatada, famous Sun front page headline, Abu Qatada must try harder. It really rubbed people up the wrong way.
It certainly did, and I think I was looking at clause 24T of the proposed Bill of Rights, which is the one that looked at the interim orders of the European Court of Human Rights, meaning that they will no longer be applicable. That's important because, as we know, Colin, over the last week or so, that particular clause has been used by the European Court of Human Rights to stop the planes being flying channel migrants to assessment centres in Rwanda. And so I think that was a very important clause. The second one, as you've identified, is that about family life and the rights to it. And I think most people will accept that there are rights to a family life, but it's been used and abused by many people like Abu Qatada and others in the claimant system to prevent themselves being removed when they're serious criminals or indeed illegal immigrants.
Just on the point about the Rwanda flights, I think what stuck in the core of many people, Stephen, was an idea that when it came to the ruling from Strasbourg, it wasn't just that it seemed fairly opaque, which we didn't know which judge was responsible for it.
No, and I actually called up the ECHR communications team straight after the judgment had been placed down, and I asked who was the name of that particular judge, and they were adamant that they were refusing. It was private information, they said. This is not going to be released. And I think that's really crucial, because a part of being an opaque legal system, remember the same claims that those who are saying that we will lose our rights under this Bill of Rights issued by Dominic Raab, is that this court wasn't actually naming who the judge was or what the particular reason was. It was just an interim order made by, what we do know, one judge. And so there's a clash there. And I think that's really important now to know. People in this country will know that it's the Supreme Court which is the final court for most cases.
Stephen Wolfe, as ever, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
My guest for the next couple of hours, Sarah Elliott, the US-UK commentator. Hi to you, Sarah. Thanks for coming in. We were talking at the top of the programme when all the graphics were rolling and the music was playing. This might be the beginning, maybe, of beginning to see the sort of post-Brexit energy of this government that's been so distracted by the pandemic.
Right, and I think it's very important that on the eve of the 6th anniversary of the referendum, which is tomorrow, that this should come out. I mean, what sovereign, independent nation cannot decide its own immigration policy? It's absolutely absurd that the EU would have any say over the British Supreme Court. And I think it's a great reminder for people why we have Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. It's to get Brexit done. And here's a great opportunity where we're revising the law and we're making it so that we can actually take back control.
And in terms of the timing, I mean, presumably it's entirely coincidental. Is it entirely coincidental that we had the Rwanda flight thwarted by a European judge, and then we get this unpicking of European supremacy over our own Supreme Court? That's coincidental,
I mean, you're going down the conspiratorial path there, but I can't put intent on a European judge. But this does it shock anybody that the Europeans would do this? And their behaviour with the Northern Ireland Protocol as well, and that discussion. I mean, it's been back and forth like this for 6 years, and no one wants to accept the outcome. And you still have people going on air saying, you know, we can roll all this back.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's talk about travel. Yes, we have to, I'm afraid. The UK's travel misery persists today. Fallout from the rail strikes yesterday, causing knock-on disruption. Roads across the country, many of them pretty much gridlocked still, certainly this morning. A limited rail service began early today, following yesterday's rail strike, as I say. Talks taking place in an attempt to resolve the dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. More rail strikes will still go ahead tomorrow and Sunday. The RMT has confirmed in the last hour they will still be happening tomorrow, the strikes. Meanwhile, Ryanair Chief Executive Michael O'Leary, never easy to distinguish from a ray of sunshine, has warned that the chaos in the aviation sector could last for months. Cheers, Michael. Joining us now, the travel editor at The Independent, Simon Calder. Simon, I'm so glad you're here because I wanted to pick you up on a test you set for us on Monday, or a test you set for this story on Monday, which was that by today you thought we would have a sense of how the union action had gone, how patchy, not just how effective, but how patchy it was, whether there were certain parts of the country where more rail workers were crossing picket lines than others, for instance.
Yes, and how well the kind of skeleton rail service was running. And the answer is pretty well. I set off on my journey of discovery yesterday, travelling fairly far and wide to see what was working. Now, initially, it was a bit of a disaster because I had 2 cancelled trains and then a breakdown at Red Hill, the train, not me. But the thing was, that was nothing to do with the strike. That was staff shortage, driver shortage, and of course the drivers aren't on strike for the first one, crew being unable to get to work for the second one, and then just a broken train. But things picked up after that. I finally made my journey, ended up in the fine railway town of Swindon, and Effectively, if you can kind of imagine a world in which trains only run from 7:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night.
And only from big cities to other big cities.
Yeah, along the main lines, actually. And so, if you look at the overall population of Great Britain, more people were near a train than weren't. That's not going to sound great if you're in Cornwall or Dorset or almost all of Wales or anything north of Glasgow in Scotland. But that's the reality. And it was interesting. Everyone who was supposed to turn up to run the signalling, according to Network Rail, did turn up. And so they could kind of keep the system open. They've been fairly conservative with what they were planning. All the, apart from sort of on-the-day problems, which you're always going to have, all the services were running pretty much to schedule. In fact, they said that probably the timekeeping was better than on a normal day.
Incredible.
And I'm now hearing from railway people, as you know, the mantra has been, don't travel anywhere, which is pretty much what the RMT union wanted to hear. Now that's softening. And indeed, I was talking to the boss of GWR, which runs from London Paddington to Cardiff in Wales, but no further, Bristol's Plymouth. And they've even got a Glastonbury Express on, which is running straight to Castle Carey in Somerset, the nearest station. And he was saying, yeah, if you want to travel, we'll take you.
But how can you be sure, Simon? That's the problem, isn't it? I mean, you know your way around the rail network, obviously. Most of us have less expertise and maybe a little less confidence, particularly when you hear that you can't check online yesterday because the websites were crashed.
Oh, sure. No, everything seems to be working. And interesting, there's one operator, Lumo, which is what's called an open access operator, running express trains from London to Newcastle, to Morpeth in Northumberland, lovely market town, and Edinburgh. And they're actually putting on an extra train tomorrow because they think there will be demand. And while the RMT, I think, had a pretty successful day in terms of the image it portrayed and its media appearances yesterday, I kind of got the sense, talking to a lot of pickets, that they were slightly concerned that actually the country didn't grind to a halt. Loads of traffic. Yes, if you weren't on one of those key main lines, it was awful, and I'm really, really sorry. But actually it wasn't, let's go back to 1989. It wasn't anything like that. People could still get to a lot of places.
But we were talking on Monday, weren't we? 1989, the government said, because then the choice wasn't between, the train or Teams and Skype. It was, the train or the car. So they opened up the big London car parks, for instance, and turned their big parks like Hyde Park and turned them into car parks.
Yes.
So there was that level of contingency planning, which sort of wasn't there yesterday because it wasn't as necessary.
No.
People are now used to working from home.
Exactly. And actually, a chap at Paddington, I was just chatting to him and seeing how things are going. He said, fine, the laptop lot have stayed at home and so nothing's too busy.
American perspective, maybe Sarah Elliott on this one, is there one?
Well, I just have to say that unions in the US are really on the decline, and we don't have major strikes like this that paralyze the country. We have 28 states that's right to work, which means that you're not forced to pay union dues as an employee. And so the unions are not what they used to be. But can you guess who the first US president was to unionize the federal workforce?
You're going to say it's Ronald Reagan, aren't you? No, you're not.
No.
I thought it was a trick question.
No, it's not. Kennedy.
Oh.
JFK was the first president to promise in his election that he would unionize federal workers, and he wanted to win, big union strongholds like Chicago, and he did. And he actually implemented it.
See, Simon Cole, you'll come here, you'll learn stuff.
I'm very much informed, but I'm just really surprised. In most parts of the civilised world, and I'll include the United States in that, people recognise that trade unions are great. You've got to have workers' representatives, and the vast majority of the time they get on very well.
We're straying off topic. I can see you both firing, getting ready for more. No. Simon, thanks very much indeed. Inflation in the UK has reached a 40-year high, pushed up by increases in food, fuel and energy costs. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, says the government is using all the tools at its disposal in a bid to try to bring inflation down. GBNews' business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, has joined us here. Lower end of expectations, 9.1, Liam, was it?
if you look at the headline numbers, I mean, it's still 9.1 consumer price index inflation, which is still 4.5 times the Bank of England's 2% target. So it's still a fresh 40-year high. Yeah. And then if you drill down into the numbers and you look at the retail price index, which the Bank of England used to target, that's 11.7%. So that's above expectations. And then if you look at the PPI, which you won't hear much about on mainstream television, but that's the producer price index. That's the cost of the stuff that businesses need to produce the goods and services that they then sell to us. Hang on to your hat, Colin. It's 22.1% during the year to May 2022, which is the highest in almost 50 years.
Wow.
There's nothing good about these inflation numbers. There's a lot of spin going on from Downing Street by people, frankly, who don't really know much about economics and just stick to politics. These are very worrying numbers, particularly at the producer price index end, because they point to price pressures in the supply chain, price pressures to come.
Can I just talk about an unrelated, well, it's related, but indirectly. Yesterday, it was that story that seemed to be enormous but got very little attention. The triple lock on the pensions. We've got loads of emails from people, mainly from pensioners, state pensioners, actually saying, thank goodness, we deserve this. How, our savings are being eroded by inflation. The government needs you to do something. And it's an extra £10 billion, however, for the Exchequer. Big numbers. And inflationary.
Now, I wouldn't begrudge any pensioner a bit more cash, but the reality is I don't think in the round that's really where most of the money is needed. That's not to say there's not pensioner poverty. There is certainly, several million people who have led distinguished lives in this country, are suffering from pensioner poverty. There are benefits specifically designed to be targeted at pensioners who have issues, whether it's to help them with their heating, their food, their mobility allowance, disability allowance, and so on, to restore the triple lock, which is effectively what the government's done for pensioners at a time like this, when so many, frankly, younger adults are struggling to make ends meet, when many lower income and even lower to middle income families with two working parents, often working multiple jobs, are struggling to make ends meet, strikes me as rather politically unambitious and maybe even tin-eared. Yes, of course, there is pensioner poverty. I would say there's much greater need among now the younger generations, particularly families of working age who are in work and who are suffering poverty, often with kids.
Sarah Elliott was nodding vigorously at that point, but was it because you're thinking, well, of course they're going to throw money at pensioners, they tend to vote for the government's party?
Yeah, well, there's that. But it's just a lazy policy. It's something they can say they've stuck to their manifesto, because it was in 2019.
Well, government should stick to the manifesto.
Yeah, of course, but this is unprecedented times. People are trying to get on the home ownership ladder. Young people have just been pillared after decades of quantitative easing and low interest rates. And now no one has savings. Everyone's still living with their mom and dad at age 30. No one's getting married and having children. We need to help younger people. But again, we're saving the baby boomers at the expense of millennials and xennials and everyone else.
First time I've heard of xennials. Enjoyed that. Why are you nodding so much?
Because I think she's exactly right. It's not as if everyone's living with their mum and dads, but we do know that a third of people under 30 are living with their mum and dads in their childhood bedrooms. Absolutely incredible. We also know that the Tories can rely on most pensioners, certainly in those swing seats, to vote for them. So if the Tories are having to bolster that true blue part of their vote, they can't be very confident about their electoral prospects. It's in the centre ground that British elections are won and lost, the centre ground demographically as well as politically, and I'd expect Downing Street to understand that. So I think unimaginative and unambitious, again, not to begrudge any pensioners their money, but we're all suffering, and I think their generation in the round is much better off than most.
Well, we will get emails, which I'm going to forward to you, Liam. Thanks very much indeed. Let's move on. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, police are warning cash machine users, ATM users, to watch out for a new type of theft. It's an old type of theft that's been given a twist. We'll be talking about that and what to do about it after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV and on radio. Lots of you getting in touch with thoughts on the proposed UK Bill of Rights. Don says, what about the potential human rights violations of France, who allow illegal immigrants to leave French shores and risk their lives on the English Channel? Trevor says you should remind Sarah Elliott that are you listening, Sarah? That the EU has absolutely nothing to do with the ECHR. She seems very misinformed. It's rude, isn't it? Do you want to come back on that?
Well, listen, I think that it has European in its name, and and also that the British people should have final say over their laws, regardless.
Yeah. I mean, we get it. We get it's not part of the European Union. We get the sort of involvement of Churchill in the early days of the ECHR. But the essential point that was addressed by Dominic Raab today is, what's the point? I mean, the clue's in the name, right? If we've got a Supreme Court, it has to have judicial supremacy.
Yes.
It's the ultimate arbiter. It's where the buck stops. It doesn't stop in Strasbourg. It stops in London. So I think that was Trevor. I hope that was an answer for you, Trevor. Stevie says people who enter this country illegally should be booted out, and I think that retaking control of our courts will allow us to do this much more easily. And Willow says old fogies in courtrooms don't have our best... Well, you don't want teenagers in courtrooms now, do you? Don't have our best interests at heart. It should be left to elected officials to decide what's right and what's wrong. I suppose it's a broad principle. That's true. We're going to move on and tell you about this. Police have warned cash machine users to watch out for a new type of theft, where bank cards are swallowed by ATM machines and then duplicated by fraudsters in a new scam. Let's turn to Laura Suter, Head of Personal Finance at AJ Bell, to tell us about this new way of liberating cash from people illegally. Laura, welcome to you. I mean, we've long had the warnings on the ATMs, haven't we, saying, mind how you put your PIN in, maybe have a wary glance over your shoulder to make sure nobody else is watching. How does this scam seem to work?
Yeah, so this scam is one that's been around for a while, and it's where you put your card into an ATM and then the details are scanned as your card goes in and digitally transmitted to the fraudsters. They might also have a camera on the ATM where they can then see your PIN number that you put in, and then at that point they've got your card details and your PIN number, and they can replicate that card and use it to withdraw cash elsewhere.
And Laura, I was thinking today, even if I was suspicious, even if having read this story and seen my card being swallowed up by the ATM, I would know that the shrewd move at that point, aware of this story, would be to call my bank. I'm not sure I could do that on the instant. And from what we're hearing, time is pressing, isn't it? Because they are using those details really quickly.
Yeah, so they know that now people are a bit more wise to this and will call their bank. And so they're using those details really quickly, as you say. So there's a couple of things. Firstly, some banks will now allow you on your app, on your mobile banking app, to freeze your card. People can do that if they think they've misplaced it or lost it. So that could be quicker. But yeah, otherwise you need to call up your bank. And as everyone knows who's tried to call their bank recently, that can be quite a long process. And also, these scammers often will do this kind of fraud on a Friday evening because they know then that bank call centres sometimes aren't open, you can't get through to the right fraud department, and that buys them a bit more time to use your details before you can cancel the card and stop them.
It's a reminder, this story, a little bit, Laura, it seems to me, for the dinosaurs like me, who have been banging on for months, for many months now, about the necessity and the resilience that you have from physical cash at a time when banks are closing, when ATMs, we're talking about ATMs now, are being junked, and the increasing reliance on a digital cashless society, which I think is folly. I think we're setting ourselves up for a fall. If we learn nothing from the pandemic, it was that those supply chains can be very fragile, and that actually, at some base level, there needs to be cash as a store of value and as a means of exchange. What say you?
So I think when it comes to fraudsters and these kind of ATM scams that we're talking about, increasingly fraudsters have followed where the money's going. And so as we move more to digital currency and online transactions, fraudsters have increasingly moved there to target people. And that's why we've seen loads of these impersonation scams, or the text messages that you'll get, or emails getting you to hand over your details. So in 6 months last year, from these kind of ATM scams, £35 million was stolen in Britain, but 10 times that amount was stolen through online scammers. So I think probably what this is a good reminder of is that these scams are still happening, but also as banks and technology providers get a bit more savvy about some of these online scams, maybe scammers are starting to go back to their original and go back to ATM scams and more physical card scams, as more people are cracking down on the online scamming.
Yeah, they'll squeeze the toothpaste at one end or the other, won't they? Laura Suter, really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for your expertise. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. Do you have, looking over your shoulder at the ATM, or is that me being neurotic?
No, I do it. I had my iPhone actually stolen out of my pocket and I never felt it. So...
Not in this building?
No, at a Waitrose, actually, in Richmond. Everyone should know. No, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. It's London, and I think in this day and age, you just can't trust anybody. And with the cost of living crisis that's coming, we're going to see more and more petty crime. People are going to want money. They're hungry. They're just,
Sarah, I've got to tell you, in a sense, I take your point about London, but this isn't about London. If what Laura Suter says is true, and of course it is, that 10
all
times...
over the country. Exactly.
And it doesn't matter whether you're in the Shetland Islands, in Bridgend or Bradford, if you're on your laptop, your computer, you're potentially vulnerable in shifting cash around. On that happy note, let's move on, shall we? And we're going to reflect on the stories we've got coming up for you through the course of the next hour or so. And I'm afraid it's going to be this week's rail strikes. Seem to have divided bits of the Labour Party. Is it less about the party and more about its leader? Is Keir Starmer the real reason why Labour is divided? Seems a fairly unfair question. And if your idea of fun is standing in the baking hot sun or pouring rain unwashed in the middle of a field while sleeping in a tent, all for the sake of music, Glastonbury is here again. We'll be asking why. First, latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. It's 4:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The RMT says tomorrow's rail strike will go ahead after talks finish today without an agreement. The unions accuse Transport Secretary Grant Shapps of wrecking negotiations. The RMT says it'll continue with industrial action until it reaches a settlement over job security and pay. Just 60% of trains are running today, despite there being no official strike, with some operators ending services earlier than usual ahead of another strike tomorrow. The Labour leader has gone head-to-head with the Prime Minister as voters prepare to go to the polls for two crucial by-elections. Sir Keir Starmer accused Boris Johnson of failing to prevent this week's national rail strikes by refusing to meet with unions and operators. Boris Johnson responded by saying the Labour leader is in the pocket of the unions, unable to punish 25 of his MPs who joined yesterday's picket lines. Wiltshire police are investigating the death of a soldier who was killed during a training exercise on Salisbury Plain. The 26-year-old man sustained head injuries after he was involved in a collision with a Warrior armoured vehicle yesterday morning. He's been identified as a member of 5th Battalion, the Rifles. An earthquake in eastern Afghanistan is thought to have killed at least 1,000 people. A local official says a further 1,500 people have also been injured during the 6.1 magnitude quake. It's feared the death toll will continue to rise as emergency services reach remote villages. A national incident has been declared after polio was detected in sewage samples in East London. The virus, which was officially eradicated in the UK in 2003, was discovered at a treatment works. The UK Health Security Agency is urging members of the public to ensure their vaccines are up to date. Whilst the risk of contamination is low, people are being warned the virus can cause paralysis and in rare cases be life-threatening. Inflation has hit its highest level in 40 years, climbing to 9.1% in May, up from 9% in April. The rising cost of food and non-alcoholic goods were the main driver, further squeezing household budgets. The Chancellor says the government is doing everything it can to reduce the figure. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to Colin in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Time for our debate this hour. The Labour Party divided over this week's rail strikes after at least 25 MPs joined the picket line, seemingly ignoring Keir Starmer's disciplinary warnings. Senior Labour MPs were reportedly told not to publicly support the strikes. The Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, and the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, appear to defy that instruction from the top. In addition to that, frontbenchers, Nivanda Mishra, Kate Osborne, Paula Barker, for instance, tweeted pictures of themselves at picket lines. We're showing one of those pictures. Apologies if you're listening on the radio. So our question, have the rail strikes undermined Keir Starmer's authority? And if they have, how much? We're joined by the GB News presenter Darren Grimes, as well as the journalist and broadcaster Matthew Stadlen. Welcome to you both. Oh, we're just going to get the camera to... There's Darren. There you go. While the camera's just finding Darren Grimes, let's go straight to Matthew Stadlen. Hi to you, Matthew. Were you surprised the number of dissenting Labour voices on this was so high?
No, I'm not very surprised. Most of the dissenting voices were backbenchers. Labour Party has traditionally, includes the name, been the party of working people. So I don't think any of us would have failed to see this coming. As far as the party being split is concerned, it's tricky waters for Keir Starmer. He doesn't want to be seen to support the Tories, but on the other hand, he doesn't want to side with militant leftists. So he's just keeping his mouth shut for the moment. The Mail, if you believe them, think he's a coward. But I mean, this is a newspaper that had as its front page today, Labour isn't working, trying to evoke memories of the 1970s. The only party that's not working at the moment is the Tory party. Let's not forget, the Tories have been in government, yes, admittedly, initially with the Lib Dems, for 12 years. So these strikes are on Boris Johnson's watch. They're not on Keir Starmer's watch. And the very fact we're having this conversation shows that the tactics that CCHQ, Conservative Party HQ, are using in trying to divert attention to Keir Starmer and Labour Party are working to some degree.
I mean, just as the person moderating this conversation, I would say, I think if the leader of a party has said to his MPs in fairly clear and stark terms, don't be joining the picket lines, it's a bad look, then that does leave questions, legitimate questions about the status of his authority. Let's turn to Darren Grimes to see what he thinks about that contention from Matthew, that this is all cooked up by Conservative Central Office.
I don't think so. I think actually you hark back to what Margaret Thatcher said about Neil Kinnock, which was along the lines of this gives you an indication of what a Labour government under Neil Kinnock would look like. I think we're seeing what actually a Labour government would be doing, which is kowtowing to their union barons, right? Saying to them, well, we need your dosh, so we're going to go along with your demands. And all that does is escalate said demands. All that does is mean that we become an economic basket case. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, let's not forget, was one politician who was saying that we should look to Venezuela as an alternative economic model for Britain. It's that sort of rhetoric that Sir Keir Starmer hasn't been able to actually move the Labour Party away from because, frankly, Colin, it still has far too many nutters in Parliament.
Matthew, whenever I see one of our contributors chuckling, I always want to know why. Tell me.
Because it's totally absurd. As I said, this is a government that has been in power for 12 years. We're talking about a divided Labour Party when Boris Johnson has just survived a no-confidence vote in his premiership by the skin of his teeth. A comfortable majority of backbenchers don't believe that Boris Johnson is the right man to lead their party. 25 MPs side with the picketers. I don't think that's a sign of a desperately divided Labour Party. How many meetings has Grant Shapps, who after all is the Transport Secretary, or Boris Johnson, who after all is the Prime Minister, how many meetings have they had with rail workers in recent months? That was a question that Keir Starmer asked at Prime Minister's Question Time this afternoon, which I watched. The answer, 0.
Darren, just in terms of those Labour MPs on picket lines, they could do no other, in a sense. I mean, yes, they could obey the instructions of their party leader, but many of them, they've come through grassroots trades union organisations to become MPs. It's one of the routes into becoming a Labour MP. So in a sense, that it would be strange for some of them to turn their backs on a moment like this.
Well, do you know what, Colin? My sympathies very much lie with people like that. You know, my granddad was a miner. I come from a working class background in the northeast of England where my mother still very much relies upon her union. I'd be all for them, Colin, if they actually were on the side of working people. I think far too often now there is an elite contempt within trade unions. Look what they did after 2016. They did all they could to line up, most of them, the vast majority, Colin, to do all they could to challenge Brexit, to say, well, the vote of my members was wrong, right? We need to overturn that. I think they have long been totally out of touch with those that pay them their wages. So, I mean, Matthew, I really don't think you can compare members of the shadow cabinet going out to picket with this cabinet. How many members of the cabinet actually went out and picketed with these people? None, because actually these people in cabinet are on the side of workers who want to go to work. They're on the side of school kids, Matthew, who want to go do their exams. And actually, if we go back to fundamental questions that we on this channel have been raising time and again, people like Matthew, I'm afraid, were far too often calling for stronger lockdowns and all of these other things, where actually that's responsible for the mess we find ourselves in right now. Not the Conservative government, but the lockdown strategy with which every parliamentarian waxed lyrical about the merits of. We haven't had that discussion. That's what's done this, not the Tories.
OK, Matthew, you're on the point of combusting. Go on.
This is typical divisive politics, and it's typically diversionary tactics from the right, because Boris Johnson at PMQs today, Prime Minister's questions, he tried to divide between strikers and strivers. Is the Prime Minister seriously suggesting that the people who work in our train stations, people who kept the railways going during the worst of the pandemic, that they are not strivers? Of course they are. We are all the same, all of us, apart from the fat cats at the very top. We're all trying to earn a living. We're all trying to make the best of life. To try to divide us just doesn't work anymore.
To talk about fat cats and the rest of us sounds a little bit divisive, if you don't mind me saying, but carry on.
No, I just think that what the government is trying to do is blame an opposition party, which has been in opposition for over a decade, for strikes that are happening on the government's watch. They're trying to, as I said, evoke memories of the 1970s. We had 13 years of Labour rule in between the 1970s and where we are now. We didn't see strikes of this sort under Tony Blair's premiership. We didn't see strikes of this sort under Gordon Brown's premiership. At the moment, as one of your headlines, Colin, just said, inflation is over 9%. We are a low-pay, low-growth, high-tax, yes, even under a Conservative administration, country at the moment. Millions of people are struggling to put food on the table. I went past my local petrol station just an hour ago, £1.93. It seemed to go up 2p just in the last 48 hours. People are having to make really, really difficult choices. So when I talk about divisiveness, yes, you could say I'm being a little divisive, that say fat cats are over there. But at the very same time, as part of his government are trying to get all of us to take a pay cut, Boris Johnson is making it easier for those big city bosses that continue to have the sorts of pay that they had before this crisis. If there's any division going on, it's between Boris Johnson and the rest of us.
Darren Grimes, not everybody remembers the gloomy, dark days of the 1970s. I do. And I reflect on the fact that we are, in a sense, being re-educated about the nature of industrial strife. And it seems to me there are differences from different sectors and different unions. And we look, and we've discussed on this channel, some of the practices, I don't like that phrase, Spanish practices, that we used to use in the 1970s, but practices which are the enemy of productivity. And sometimes safety. We reflected on Monday with Simon Calder, highly respected travel editor, who said you've got a situation where the unions have thumbed their nose at the idea, for instance, of sending a train down a track that will take 70,000 pictures an hour, along with a drone, to ensure that track is safe. Union rules insist that you will send rail workers in high-vis jackets to do it, even though half a dozen of them on average get killed a year. That isn't just sclerotic trades unionism, it's potentially fatal, Darren.
Absolutely. And I mean, ticket offices where they're selling one ticket an hour, right? But trade unions are saying, well, actually, we've got to keep that job. We've got to keep that open. That, to me, is really a good sign of how they have totally lost their way, right? This is them seeking power against a democratically elected Conservative government. 14 million people, Colin, in 2019 voted Tory. They keep losing at the ballot box, so they're going to circumvent the ballot box and try and enact power and control that way. This is what this is all about. And you talk about working people, right? I hear time and again on my show, on this channel, about people who are genuinely struggling. If you're in the northeast of England, for example, and you primarily use your car to get to work, you haven't seen an inflation-busting pay increase. You're struggling. As Matthew says, you cannot afford your petrol, maybe, because of our absolutely insane pandering to green extremists on the net zero policy, right? We've got all of these things adding up, making your life harder. And then they turn around, Colin, and say people on 70 grand pushing a button for a train should get a pay rise. You've got to be joking. Pull the other one, mate.
Matthew, you just did a good old-fashioned panto eye roll. Do explain.
Yeah, it's just tricky when we're not in the studio and we can't all sort of see each other at the same time and interact properly, but we'll do that, I'm sure, in the future. No, just on the green thing, unfortunately, and I said this at the very beginning of the year on Twitter, the real challenge of our times is how we continue to move towards net zero, which is, we can have this debate another time, Darren's had his say, it is vitally important that we move to net zero in order that the planet remains habitable for great swathes of our populations. Otherwise, you ain't seen nothing like the migration and refugee crises that we've had already, because great parts of the world will no longer be inhabitable if temperatures continue to rise as they are. The great challenge is, how do we continue to fight that good fight at the same time as making sure that people can continue to live reasonable lives? Because believe me, as I've said, and as Darren agrees with me, the cost of living, I mean, it is absolutely smashing people around the head at the moment. As far as the danger, the question of danger, which you rightly brought up, Colin, interestingly, the newspapers haven't really, to the best of my knowledge, been covering the details of these strikes. It's all been about Boris Johnson against Keir Starmer, are Labour divided, is it Labour's fault, is it the government's fault, and so forth. On the details are quite nitty-gritty. And on the danger, the trade unions will say one thing, the other side will say another. I don't have a particularly strong view either way on the actual wranglings of this strike. But what does matter, we have a government that really is on the side of people that Darren, I believe genuinely champions. And that government is not a government that wants to cut controls on the salaries or the bonuses of people who are earning hundreds of thousands of pounds in the city when people like Darren and plenty of people I know are struggling.
OK, we've got time for one more, and I know we started with Matthew, so we'll end with Darren. Darren.
Well, look, I think on the whole bankers' bonuses row, right, this is about Britain, Brexit Britain, showing that actually it is a financial hub ready for business. It's not about trying to fatten the coffers of Tory donors, which seems to be the suggestion by some quarters. I actually think we've got to go back to talking about the net zero point, right, where you're talking vast sums. This is just a taster, Colin, of how much harm is going to come. The immiseration of the working class is what we're talking about. This is a snapshot of that picture, if you ask me. And on that point about trade union power, trade union control, actually, I think it goes back to that point. Focusing on this issue relentlessly, by the way, I think is a very southern pursuit, because most people out there are using their cars to go to work, right? Why should they, who handed over vast sums in taxpayer cash during the pandemic to protect the jobs of wealthy train drivers, why should they be expected now to cough up even more?
I'm going to wind it up there. I can see Matthew's gearing up for another point. We're out of time. We were pretty wide-ranging there. But Darren Grimes and Matthew Stanton, thanks both very much indeed for your thoughts. Sarah Elliott is my studio guest today, who was a spectator on that particular encounter. Sarah, any thoughts?
Well, one thought that came to mind is that you have net zero and these picketing train drivers, and guess what? The way we're going to get to net zero and deal with these picketing train drivers, technology advancements. They're going to be replaced by driverless trains. We will not have any more strikes, and then also modernization will help us be more fuel efficient in the future.
Let's just take you through some emails, plenty coming in. Tim says Starmer is weak and needs to be tougher with his party members, otherwise there will be no Labour left. Joanna says, Matthew's quite right that the strikes are on the Tories and not Labour. If you went into a hotel room that was messy, you would blame it on the previous guests, not the ones that were in it 12 years ago. It's an interesting analogy, I'd say. Darren, thanks very much indeed. Darren Grimes for coming in. It's lovely to see you in the flesh. I'm not hearing anything in my ear to tell us that we're going to be doing anything next. Oh, I can hear some music. That's normally a good sign. So with that, we'll head off and leave you maybe with the weather.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio. On digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Time for 5 to 5 as we discuss 5 things you might want to know about before 5 o'clock. At 5, the Royal College of GPs is warning around 20,000 doctors could leave the profession over the next 5 years. The study suggests they're blaming long working hours and unsafe levels of pressure, claiming patients are at risk because they don't have time to access them properly. At 4, a plane carrying more than 100 passengers has crash-landed at Miami Airport after the landing gear failed. The aircraft hit a small building and a communications tower while skidding on the runway before bursting into flames. 3 people taken to hospital after that accident. At 3, Virgin Media facing a backlash after introducing a fine to customers who miss appointments with engineers. The company's issued the warning, which could see fines of up to £100 imposed if you don't answer the door. The spokesperson for the company says they offer customer service and repairs at no extra cost, and charges for missed appointments are commonplace across the industry. Let's talk about that, that's quite interesting. At 2, researchers calling for balancing on one leg to be included in midlife health checkups. A new study by a team of global researchers, including experts from Bristol Medical School, found that people who cannot stand on one leg for 10 seconds have an increased risk of death within 7 years. We think about reenacting that in the studio, but what if it went wrong? You might have only minutes left to live, Sarah. And at 1, favourite story of the day, a 92-year-old has become the oldest person in Britain to sit a GCSE exam. Derek Skipper from Cambridgeshire says it doesn't matter 2 hoots what his results are, but the former RAF engineer wanted to challenge himself with a modern exam paper to outdo a family friend who struggled to pass the test. 5 things you might want to know about before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. What, if anything, there, Sarah, caught your ear?
I love that the 92-year-old sat for an exam. I think that's fantastic, and it gives me hope that you can teach an old dog new tricks, you know.
What about fining people if they're not there when you turn up at their house for an appointment? That's something new under the sun.
Can we do the reverse if the guy doesn't show up for an appointment?
Or if they say, look, we're going to turn up, but it'll be any time between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Well, what good is that to man or beast?
Exactly. You know, I mean, I think it's kind of ridiculous, but I would be interested in seeing the figures of how many people are not at home when someone shows up, kind of thing. But, you know, the 30-minute warning usually helps, you know, or an hour warning that they're on their way.
Oh, and GPs, got to address that GP question. General practice is in it feels like it's been in crisis for years, doesn't it? But this affects people.
Yeah, this is pretty actually terrifying. I'm sitting here listening to this and go, I should probably look into private insurance now, which, I mean, very sadly is where the NHS is pushing people who want that attentive, really specific care.
OK, Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. Much more news coming up at the top of the hour. Just gone 5 and coming up live at 5 as the government plans to outline how it intends to override the supremacy of Europe's Human Rights Court. We ask what difference, if any, it will make to most of us. First the planes, then the trains, and now gridlock on some roads, more travel pain as the effects of this week's rail strikes and airport chaos persist. The Chancellor says he's using all the tools at his disposal to bring inflation down as the rate hits a 40-year high. And alongside me for the next hour, having her say on the stories of the day, the political commentator Sarah Elliott. Let us know your thoughts, won't you, please? Email me at gbviews@gbnews for anything which gets you a goat, or maybe you want to praise. First, the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. It's 1 minute past 5. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The RMT says tomorrow's rail strike will go ahead after talks finish today without an agreement. The unions accuse Transport Secretary Grant Shapps of wrecking negotiations. The RMT says it'll continue with industrial action until it reaches a settlement over job security and pay. Just 60% of trains are running today, despite there being no official strike, with some operators ending services earlier than usual, ahead of another strike tomorrow. The Labour leader has gone head-to-head with the Prime Minister as voters prepare to go to the polls for 2 crucial by-elections. Sir Keir Starmer accused Boris Johnson of failing to prevent this week's national rail strikes by refusing to meet with unions and operators. As the country deals with the biggest walkout by train staff in 3 decades, the Labour leader said the Prime Minister is only interested in blaming everyone else.
The Prime Minister of this country and his Transport Secretary haven't attended a single meeting, held a conversation or lifted a finger to stop these strikes. So rather than blame everyone else, why doesn't he do his job, get round the table and get the trains running?
Boris Johnson responded by saying the Labour leader is in the pocket of the unions.
He strikes, as he knows, it is up to the railway companies to negotiate, and that is their job. We know why he takes the line he does. We know why he won't condemn the strikes. We know why even now he hasn't got the gumption to call out his MPs who are going out to support the pickets, Mr. Speaker. The reason his authority is on the line in this matter is that they take £10 million from the unions, Mr. Speaker.
In other news, Wiltshire police are investigating the death of a soldier who was killed during a training exercise on Salisbury Plain. The 26-year-old man sustained head injuries after he was involved in a collision with a Warrior armoured vehicle yesterday morning. He's been identified as a member of 5th Battalion, the Rifles. Inflation has hit its highest level in 40 years, climbing to 9.1% in May, up from 9% in April. The rising cost of food and non-alcoholic goods were the main driver, further squeezing household budgets. Last week, the Bank of England warned inflation was likely to peak at more than 11% in October. The Deputy Prime Minister has outlined new legislation which gives the UK power to override rulings by the European Court of Human Rights. It's after the court blocked the first deportation flight carrying asylum seekers to Rwanda last week. Dominic Raab told MPs the UK's new Bill of Rights will place ultimate legal power in the hands of the UK's Supreme Court. A national incident has been declared after polio was detected in sewage samples in London. The virus, which was officially eradicated in the UK in 2003, was discovered at a treatment works which serves 4 million people in the north and east of the capital. The UK Health Security Agency is urging members of the public to ensure their vaccines are up to date. Whilst the risk of contamination is low, people are being warned the virus can cause paralysis and, in rare cases, be fatal. An earthquake in eastern Afghanistan is thought to have killed at least 1,000 people. A local official says a further 1,500 people have also been injured. The 6.1 magnitude quake struck early this morning, reducing homes to rubble. Rescue operations are underway, but it's feared the death toll will continue to rise as emergency services reach remote villages. The organiser of Glastonbury Festival, Emily Evis, says it's amazing to see people back after a 3-year break due to the pandemic. Festival goers queued from the early hours to be among the first on site at Worthy Farm in Somerset, whilst others suffered travel delays following yesterday's rail strike. The event, which officially opened this morning, is celebrating its 50th anniversary with acts including Sir Paul McCartney and Ukraine's Eurovision Song Contest winners. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Colin.
5 minutes past 5, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has announced plans to introduce a new domestic Bill of Rights. It'll mean that decisions made by British judges in the Supreme Court will have supreme authority following a decision, not least by the European Court of Human Rights, to block the first flight of asylum seekers or migrants to Rwanda. Speaking to Parliament today, Dominic Raab asked what the point was of a British Supreme Court if it, quote, bows in subordination to a European one.
Mr. Speaker, our Bill of Rights will strengthen our proud tradition of freedom. It will demarcate a clearer separation of powers. It will ensure greater respect for our democratic institutions, and it will better protect the public and restore a healthy dose of common sense to the justice system, which is essential for commanding public confidence. Ultimately, it will make us freer, it will help keep our streets safer, and I commend this statement to the House.
Let's go to the human rights lawyer, David Hague, to ponder on this one. David Hague, welcome to you. On the point that Dominic Raab makes there about public confidence, it's an important one, isn't it? For the law to work properly, we mustn't have stories, and I can think of several, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners can as well, which have a corrosive effect on public trust in the law. The one that was cited in the newspapers today, I suppose, an obvious one, Abu Qatada, and that endless referral to the right to a family life, which seemed to thwart the obvious wishes of judges and politicians too.
Hi, well, good afternoon, Colin. I think one of the things to look at, first of all, is that we've been living with the Human Rights Act for nearly 22 years. So it's something that's very intrinsic in everyday life. And of course, in any type of legislation, you're going to get absurd cases. You mentioned just a few of the cases that we've seen under the Human Rights Act come up. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't been effective. And it's not been, it certainly has, as far as I'm concerned, been one of the most, if not the most important protection of human rights legislation we've ever have in this country.
But on the point about Strasbourg, you can see why that had a corrosive effect. The idea of, and maybe you can tell me why we never found out who the judge was in Strasbourg from the ECHR who made this ruling on the Rwanda flight. But people, you can understand why people are baffled by that. We have a Supreme Court. The clue's in the name. You would assume that people appeal and they appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court, only to find out it's not that supreme, actually.
I think that's something that it's nothing new in our court system. The human rights, the European Court of Human Rights, has been something that's been there, and our are part of it, has been there for a very long time, since just after the Second World War. So it's not something new. It's not something that should surprise anyone. And I think the timing of the announcements that we saw of the Rwanda policy last week, the extradition of Assange, and then the introduction of the Bill of Rights now, when it's something that's been discussed for over a decade, I think is very, very, very suspicious. But it's certainly something that isn't new. Now, I do agree with you. You know, if you have a court in this country that many people will consider, why is a court in Europe having supremacy over that? I understand that argument.
Themes and topics together. We're told that the Bill of Rights will also enshrine rights to free speech. I mean, personally, and I think I speak for many on this news channel, that's to be welcomed. How you codify it, I'm not entirely sure.
I mean, that's something that is in existence already. You already have the Human Rights Act for however long that may remain. That already has protections of free speech. And freedom of expression in there. And it's certainly an interesting time for them to push forward with like I said, the Bill of Rights. We only saw a few days ago them confirming, Priti Patel confirming her approval of the extradition of Julian Assange. One of his defences is that his acts were part of free speech. Yet we're told at the same time the Bill of Rights will improve free speech. So the two don't really kind of sit very well together. So I think, you know, the devil will be in the detail. We've seen the bill today, we've seen the text of it, but it's certainly, in my view, something that is essentially constitutional butchery of the existing human rights regime, and one that I think is not welcomed by any of the relevant groups. If you look at the human rights organisations, they're not understandably welcome it. But if you also look at the lawyers, look at the president of the Law Society, she also has said that it's not something that is supported.
David, you're the legal expert, I'm not, but what do you say to those people who say that when you enshrine in a bill or an act a set of rights, almost as you would a constitution, you undermine a foundational principle of law in this land, the common law, that idea of building case upon case upon case. Are the two things in conflict?
Well, no. I mean, of course, we have, as you quite rightly mentioned, the common law in this in the UK. But that's together with statute is something which our judiciary build upon. So as each case comes, then you have depending on whichever the details of each that case, you build a thing called precedent, and that's something, again, going back to the Human Rights Act, that we've got 22 years of precedent in our courts of the application of the Human Rights Act. Now we're just going to tear that up and bring in a new Bill of Rights, which is woolly in terms of the language at best, and which actually creates, when looking at it, can create certain rights which are lower than others, certain individuals that are not going to benefit from their rights, so almost a class system in rights. And it's also almost giving a green light to certain public authorities and others of which rights could be easily abused. And that's, I think, at the beginning of concerns that we have for the Bill of Rights.
Does it matter that we've had 22 years of this when we've had presumably centuries of statutes on the books that lawyers and politicians and ultimately we citizens can appeal to?
No, I mean, I think things change. You know, the world changes and legislation and needs to keep up with that. But I don't think that it's required to change the Human Rights Act. I mean, it's happening. It's something we're all going to have to deal with. It's going to, the Bill of Rights will become law. The Human Rights Act will become history. But the human rights need to be universal and fundamental. And the Human Rights Act is based, again, on the European Convention of Human Rights, which the vast majority of all of Europe, and that's not the EU, that's all of Europe, including, you know, from Ukraine to many countries, have all signed up to that. So by effectively, while we're not removing ourselves from the European Court of Human Rights, we're kind of having one foot in and one foot out, saying that we're part of it, but they're not going to have supremacy anymore. We will, but on some cases only. So it's just created a layer of confusion. Whereas before, I think the Human Rights Act was something we've been with for 22 years. People were aware of how that applied to their daily lives, or even because it's been so widespread, how, you know, it applies to people's daily lives, but they may not have realised it. Now we've just ripped that up for an era of confusion, I think, going forward.
David Hague, thanks for your time. There's just a popping on the microphone, which is not actually confusing our viewers too much, but thanks for your patience anyway. Sarah Elliott alongside me. A layer of confusion, says David Hague.
A layer of confusion or a new job for new lawyers. So it could create jobs. Yeah, I mean, I can see how people who are very well versed in this human rights law will find this an added burden. But at the same time, I think the citizens of this country, correct me if I'm wrong, but would feel more reassured that their laws are the ones with the supremacy and have the final say. And also that we're not completely leaving from the human rights law. We're making it so that British law also stands higher than other country law.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. We're going to move on and talk about, I'm afraid, travel. The after effects of yesterday's rail strikes have continued to cause some knock-on disruption. Actually, interestingly, we were talking to Simon Calder, the travel editor of The Independent, about an hour ago, and he was saying, actually, it wasn't as bad as he expected yesterday, nor today. That roads across the country, some roads across the country, were gridlocked this morning with that limited rail service beginning first thing. Talks continued today. The RMT, around about an hour and a half ago, said, forget it. It's still very much on strike action for tomorrow. No word yet on Saturday. And, of course, the days in between are lost to some degree because the train's in the wrong place, etc., etc. Meanwhile, Ryanair Chief Executive Michael O'Leary has been warning that the chaos in aviation could last for months. Let's turn to the travel journalist and author of You Think You Know British Rail, Christian Wolmar. Christian Wolmar, welcome to you. I think we talked on Monday as well, just not knowing quite how effective or patchy the rail strike would be. I mean, I know it's difficult to know for sure, but what is your sense? How effective was the call to arms by the unions?
Well, it was quite effective. Obviously, the roads were pretty congested, whatever Simon Calder found. But Network Rail managed to run, they claim, around 4,500 trains out of the normal 20,000. The big problem, I think, was the fact that all the trains stopped at 6:30 because they only had one shift of signallers on. And once you have no signallers, you can't have a railway. And I think that people found difficult. I heard stories of people kind of walking back home for a couple of hours as the buses were full and they were unable to get home in any other way. And of course, there was disruption this morning, but it's dealable with, but it causes a lot of misery.
And when misery happens, human nature suggests will blame someone. Some people will blame the union, some people will blame the government. But that's the game we're in, isn't it? And the proportion of people who blame one or t'other is what will carry the argument.
Yes, and I'm interested that watching the Vox Pops on television and looking at the existing surveys, that actually people are quite sympathetic to the unions. And I must say, Mick Lynch, the boss of RMT, has done a brilliant PR job in challenging the journalists who try and kind of portray him as a militant and so on. And he's kind of been a very effective voice for the union. And we have to remember that it's not the union barons, as they've been called by the government, who have actually announced the strike and gone on strike. It's basically the rank and file members who voted very overwhelmingly in favour of this strike and have lived up to their votes by staying away. And so this is not going to get resolved by a lot of shouting for the rooftops. It's only going to be resolved by serious talks between the government and the unions, because it is the government pulling the strings. And I think it was fantastically dishonest of the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, to pretend that it was somebody else in charge, the railway companies or TfL in terms of the underground. It's absolutely not true. The government owns Network Rail. The government is in charge of the train operating companies. It is up to them to solve this.
can see tactically why he wants to stay out of it, but I think a lot of people will agree with you, Christian Wolmar, when they say ultimately the government can play a decisive role in this. Where I'm not sure you're right is in saying that, you know, give peace a chance, eventually good sense will prevail and there'll be a deal. Might it not be the case, actually, that if as reported this morning, the government's braced for this to go on months for an old 1970s-style battle of attrition, at the end of which they can say pretty convincingly, we've won this argument?
I think only if public opinion is with them, and it doesn't seem that it is. Look, you know, lots of people, or most people, are suffering from the unexpected increase in the cost of living. They can see that the unions are not, you know, fighting for something absolutely crazy. They just want a reasonable pay rise. I think for ministers, as Simon Clarke, the Treasury Minister, has done the round, saying, well, I'm afraid, chaps, that, you know, because we messed up the economy so badly, you're going to have below inflation rises, and that's tough. And I don't think that message has gone down very well, do you?
Not for me to say. Actually, I may say, but not to you, Christian Wolmar. I'm going to talk to Sarah Ellis about it, because I know you've got to go by 20 past, but we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Christian Wolmar joined us to talk about the rail strikes. I've been quite impressed by the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, actually, since we're talking about him. He's a very tall chap who yesterday announced that there'd be a massive increase in the triple lock pension, which we've already discussed. Christian Wolmar says that when you do the vox pops, in other words, if you talk to people and you look at the polling, there is a lot of sympathy for the trades unions. Do you agree with that?
I mean, I haven't talked to them, he would know better, but I have a feeling when they find out how much they make, that sympathy might go down a bit. I mean, they make well above the average salary in this country. You know, I kind of see this as kind of their last stand. They're dinosaurs that can easily be replaced by technology. I understand what they're saying. We all wish we could have above inflation pay rises right now, but I just don't think it's practical, and I think the government needs to stand strong against this. Yeah. When
Christian Wolmar was talking about people, you know, getting to the train station at 6:30 and then realising that was the end of their journey, crikey, I've got a 2-hour walk home. I don't think they spend those 2 hours walking home thinking, you know, that Mick Lynch is doing a cracking job, isn't he? Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I think they're pretty annoyed and thinking, you know what, these guys, they either need to be replaced or the government needs to just stand strong. You know, and listen, who's benefited from this but the PC, working class, the middle class that can sit at their computer and work from home all day? But there are a lot of people, usually on lower salaries, that need those trains to get to work every day. And so, you know, the country needs to work.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. The UK has hit a 40-year high when it comes to inflation. It's increases in food, our old friend fuel, I'm afraid, and energy costs as well. The Chancellor says the government's, quote, using all the tools at its disposal to bring that inflation rate down. Let's turn to the consumer and money expert, Martin James. Martin, warm welcome to you. The headline rate is shocking. Liam Halligan, our economics editor, was in here an hour ago saying, actually, look, guys, it may be that you haven't seen anything yet.
Well, hello, Colin. And I wish once again I could come on the show with some better news for everybody. But let's try and unpick this a little bit. You're absolutely right. It is pretty grim reading or viewing today for many people looking at this record level of inflation. Now, it's worthwhile bearing in mind that the Bank of England has a target rate of 2% for inflation, and that's some way off what's actually happening clearly. And that's the same Bank of England who are predicting that we will be seeing inflation rates of up to 11%. So it really is a big, big concern for people. Now, there's lots of supposition about, you know, what might be driving this, and there are many other factors that we can discuss. But when you actually dig down into the consumer price index, the main measure that we draw all of this from, that's the basket of goods that everyone has a good chuckle at every year when we announce what's in and what's out. When you actually look into those stats, it gets really quite interesting. Because many commentators and indeed some government ministers have suggested that actually a bit of austerity and us simply not spending as much will actually help reduce inflation. When you actually look at what's the biggest driver in the CPI, it's actually our good old friend energy costs as well, and other home costs. And the thing about energy is, short of turning everything off, there's very little we can do about it. It's a cost that's out of our hands. And of course, next on the list is petrol prices, which is something that has kept my phone ringing for the past 3 months now. We also have food in there as well, which we can come on to. But it's very much things that simply we have no choice about other than taking drastic action that's actually driving this inflationary rise.
Martin, just hold that thought for a second, because I just want to turn to Sarah Elliott, who is a font of good ideas, but I think on this has something really important to add as somebody who is fundamentally American, because I think we can be, Sarah, quite parochial in conversations about inflation, can't we? We focus, obviously, on what the situation is in the UK. We ignore the global picture, and there is a global picture here, isn't there? I mean, you for instance, what's happening in the States?
Well, the States' inflation is actually at 8.6%, which is lower than the UK at the moment. But also our Federal Reserve, our central bank, has really taken on the lead here to up interest rates. They just did a huge boost, 75 basis points, which is quite radical for them. And that is to control the flow of money, because inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. And it is a supply issue. We have, tons of energy resources in the United States. We have some great ones here in the UK. And we really need to crack on and get that pumping and get it to the consumer so that prices can go down. It's a multi-pronged approach to inflation, but we really need aggressive action in the short term so that we can get out of this as soon as possible.
Yeah, Martin, I just wanted to make the point that I know, people will be scratching their heads thinking, oh, goodness me, prices going up again. But actually, there is a global dimension to this.
Oh, absolutely. That's clear in kind of the many, many different shortages that we're talking about at the moment. For example, the impact of the war in Ukraine on wheat, on sunflower oil, and the subsequent effect on, many of the goods that we consume, and that's led to kind of the increase in food prices. I mean, the Kantar research agency just announced recently that they expect the average supermarket shop for consumers to increase by £380 this year. That's actually an increase on what they estimated just a month ago of 100 quid. So actually, this is really having a knock-on effect. And it's, as Sarah says, it's not just one cause, and there's no simplistic solution to it. But we do need aggressive action. We can't just sit around and wait for this to magically sort itself out, because all of the economists I speak to on a regular basis are saying we're in this for certainly the long haul for the time being.
Martin James, nice to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Coming up here, tomorrow, voters will go to the polls in 2 by-elections for the Conservative-held constituencies of Wakefield and Tiverton and Honiton. We will discuss the Tories' chances and what that will mean for Boris Johnson should they lose. First, a look at the weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Plenty of fine sunny weather around this evening, but the weather is on the change. Still some hot sunshine tomorrow, but an increasing chance of seeing some thunderstorms and turning more showery generally as we head into the weekend. There is a weak weather front across the far north of Scotland, but actually it's the weather coming in from the south that's going to give us a few problems over the next 48 hours or so. Initially, though, very pleasant out there this evening. Warm, hazy, a balmy summer's evening, if you like. But notice down to the south, the threat of some heavy showers across the Channel Isles, and they may well track across the Channel during the early hours. Always the risk of a bit of patchy rain across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, but for most it's a dry night, a pretty warm night. Temperatures in many towns and cities staying in the mid-teens. Another very warm and sunny day to come for many on Thursday. A lot of clouds still across western Scotland, light today, and Northern Ireland, but it's further south where the cloud is likely to produce some heavy showers, initially across the southeast, but becoming more widespread over England and Wales as we go through the day. Now, not everywhere is going to see these big downpours, but where they do occur, they could cause some problems. Highest temperatures during tomorrow. Northern England, North Midlands, where we could push 30 Celsius. Many other places, though, into the low to mid-20s. But we do have this Met Office yellow warning in place for those thunderstorms. As I said, hit and miss. Not everywhere will see them, but where they do occur, they could cause some disruption, large hail, gusty winds, a lot of rain falling in a short space of time. Continued likelihood of heavy showers during the course of Thursday night and into Friday. And then out west, we've got these bands of rain starting to push in, and they will bring some wet weather to Northern Ireland. Greater chance again of seeing some heavy showers breaking out during the day across parts of England. across the Midlands and the northeast of England in particular. But the outlook is for the cooler and showery weather in the west to become more dominant. Temperature dropping off on Friday, dropping off further for Saturday.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Just gone 5:30 with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV and on radio. A number of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the proposed Bill of Human Rights. Big punctuation mark in our legal story in this country today. Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, announcing it in the Commons. David says, great, at last, common sense. We elect the government, they make legislation and our courts decide. Roderick says, Colin, your human rights lawyer is always going to defend and protect his wealth and income stream, isn't he? I think Roderick may have a point in saying that human rights lawyers tend to stick up for human rights, don't they? Clive says, start filling the planes. If 400 arrive today at Dover, put them straight onto the plane with no give or takes and no ifs or buts. But if we need to put on 2 planes a day, so be it. Will says, I don't trust the government to protect our human rights. Quite frankly, I would rather a court in Brussels was overseeing us. There's always one. Now, the pressure's on Boris Johnson and his government when voting takes place tomorrow in 2 by-elections. The first, Tiverton and Honiton, are part of the, well, Tory rural heartlands, I suppose it is. The other, Wakefield, newly won seat for the Tories in the so-called Red Wall in the north. The results of the by-elections could highlight the prospects for the Conservatives in the next general election. Joining me, Angela Epstein, journalist and broadcaster, to ponder on this one. Angela, hi to you. I mean, they could be a bellwether, a litmus test for the Tories. They could just be one of those, mid-parliamentary term harumphs that the electorate gives.
I like harumph. Well, I think the thing is... Go on, you answer it. No, the thing is that you've got 2 constituencies at either end of the political spectrum, as you say. One, the classic Red Wall seat, one that's been in Conservative, it's been a Tory seat for decades. So the fact that they may both give Boris, a drubbing, will reflect something of the confidence that people have in their Prime Minister. I mean, remember that usually governments don't do well in by-elections during their mid-term. And we've also got this situation now, what can we do with Boris? We had a confidence vote, and, he's still here, that's fine. Things may change when the Privileges Committee report on whether or not he misled the House. That's not till the autumn. So I think there's so much going on now, as you know, and as you've been talking about before I came on. I think people will simply vote with their feet tomorrow. I think it will be quite a visceral, emotional vote because it's not going to hugely change the landscape. And I think people vote very differently in by-elections to the way they do in general elections. So I think he'll probably lose both, but I don't think, if I was taking a punt, I don't think the Conservatives will lose as badly as we may think they will.
Interesting. But it's also interesting, isn't it, that, and it's entirely coincidental, of course, that we've got one seat in the southwest where the threat for the Tories presumably is the Liberal Democrats, and there's talk of Labour sort of effectively stepping aside to let the Lib Dems have a good run at it. It's a totally different proposition and a totally different problem for the Tories in Wakefield, Red Wall, Labour the opposition. And they will get a sense, I suppose, depending on how they do in both those seats, of which way they need to face more than the other.
Well, possibly yes, but equally, it's a one. Just bearing in mind what I just said a moment ago, it's whether when people go into the ballot box, it's all about, I want to give Boris a good hiding, as opposed to I want a Lib Dem representing my seat, and whether it will be the kind of fabled protest vote. And I think that's why it's going to be quite difficult to call, because the demographics are so different. Down in Cornwall, it's an older demographic, lower. I mean, unemployment is not so much of an issue now, but certainly greater solvency there. And I think the complexion of the voters are so different. I think it's going to, as I say, come from how they feel personally. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the Conservatives to read how they sort of front face this after this, because they're such different seats.
Angela, got to leave it there, but nice to talk to you as always. Thanks very much indeed. No harum thing. Coming up, new cars in the UK will be installed with new anti-tailgating technology from next month, following a change actually to EU rules, I thought. Does that pave the way for driverless cars? Latest news headlines first with Tamsin.
Thank you, Colin. It's 5:35. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The RMT says tomorrow's rail strike will go ahead after talks finished today without an agreement. The unions accuse Transport Secretary Grant Shapps of wrecking negotiations. The RMT says it'll continue with industrial action until it reaches a settlement over job security and pay. Just 60% of trains are running today, despite there being no official strike, with some operators ending services earlier than usual, ahead of another strike tomorrow. Inflation has hit its highest level in 40 years, climbing to 9.1% in May, up from 9% in April. The rising cost of food and non-alcoholic goods were the main driver, further squeezing household budgets. The Chancellor says the government is doing everything it can to reduce the figure. A soldier has died after being hit by an armoured vehicle during routine training exercises on Salisbury Plain. Wiltshire police say the 26-year-old man suffered head injuries after he was involved in a collision yesterday morning. The force says it's investigating the incident alongside the Army and Health and Safety. The soldier was a member of the 5th Battalion, the Rifles. A national incident has been declared after polio was detected in sewage samples in East London. The virus, which was officially eradicated in the UK in 2003, was discovered at a treatment works. The UK Health Security Agency is urging members of the public to ensure their vaccines are up to date. Whilst the risk of contamination is low, people are being warned the virus can cause paralysis and, in rare cases, be life-threatening. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. In just a moment, it's back to Colin.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
By-elections in Wakefield, Tiverton and Honiton. Sam says Labour will win a 4,000 majority, quite a precise number. The Tories will hold on in Tiverton. Chris says good luck to Reform UK all the way. Liam says I think Labour will win, but not because they're good, only because the Tories are bad. Sprinkling of emails. The AA has said the majority of new cars in the UK will be installed with new anti-tailgating technology from next month, following an EU ruling. Automatic emergency braking technology slows down or stops a vehicle if the driver doesn't respond to a potential collision. Joined by Amanda Stretton, motoring journalist and former racing driver. Amanda, welcome to you. I drive a fairly old car that doesn't have this gadgetry, but I talked to somebody today who's deeply suspicious of it and said it almost made him crash. What say you?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. So this technology is very clever, and what it does is it uses the car's cameras, radar, LiDAR to detect potential hazards up ahead. And if the driver doesn't respond, it will automatically put the brakes on. The danger is that in some cases, this technology is still quite lumpy, for want of a better word, harumphy, to quote you a little earlier. And so it cannot work sometimes. So it can automatically suddenly slam the brakes on at a moment where there is no actual hazard. So, for example, I've spoken to people who have had the emergency brakes put on just because the car detected a shadow. Now, obviously, you're not going to crash into a shadow. So, it's great technology when it works, but we are still very much in the formative years of the development. I think the greater issue is by mandating it in all new cars, you're also opening the door to a lot of other issues for car owners, because not everybody can necessarily afford it. We are making our cars as more and more and more technologically advanced. They're also becoming more and more complicated to fix, which is why we're seeing insurance go up. It's just another cost that is going to have a knock-on effect to drivers.
And just in terms of that mandatory element, Amanda, is the ruling to say you, the car manufacturer, Fiat, Ford, whoever it is, we are telling you you must put this tech in, but once it's in, can you and I turn it off?
Yeah, so you can turn it off, but obviously, if it's in the car and it's mandated that it needs to be in the car, which it already is in some places across the world. Ultimately, the people who buy the car are going to have to carry the cost of that, whether they like it or not. Now, the other thing is that not everybody drives on motorways, not everybody, there are so many issues around this. Now, that's not saying that the technology isn't good. And as we look to a future of mobility where we will perhaps be seeing autonomous cars on the road, obviously this technology is going to be imperative, because this is what's going to stop the car from crashing into a pedestrian that steps out into the middle of the road, for example. So it's really important that this technology is trialled. I'm just slightly hesitant about mandating it, legislating that every new car needs to be sold with this on.
We were talking, I think, yesterday, Amanda, about this. I mean, obviously in the context of the rail strikes right now, and to what extent this type, a more advanced version, I'm guessing, of what we're talking about now, but this type of driverless technology changes that dynamic. I speculated that, 20, 25 years from now, on the current trajectory of technology, we'll have on the motorway lots of lorries, with I don't know how many millimetres between bumpers. They will be tailgating. Oh, yes, they will be, won't they? And and that means the trains aren't carrying freight, and we'll all be doing the same in cars. And this technology may, to some degree, herald the end or, a much reduced railway service.
Well, you're absolutely right. And the other thing with this technology, and sort of feeding into what you were saying before, this type of sort of peloton HGV structure has been tried across the world as well. So this is where the HGVs, as you say, are just inches away from one another, massively reduces fuel as well. And you just have a train, for want of a better words, of lorries as opposed to a train running on the tracks, chugging down a motorway. So yes, this technology is going to be heralding a very different future. I wouldn't want to put a time limit on it. There are still so many problems, so many how we legislate globally, how we assess risk. There are so many. Who's at fault if this technology fails? Is it you, the driver? Is it the vehicle manufacturer? Or is it the company that provided the technology and the camera and the LiDAR in the first place? We're still a long way off, and nobody's actually come up with any really sensible solutions on how we're going to address it. But there's no doubt it is going to come at some stage.
Yeah, and the UK does seem to be, in terms of the R&D of this sort of stuff, right up there with the world leaders in the pack, doesn't it? Amanda, we've got to leave it there. We can't talk any more about it, but no need to harumph. We're going to talk about a favourite story of the day, without question. A sailmaker from Lancashire is attempting to break the record for sailing the smallest boat across the Atlantic. This is the story of Andrew Bedwell and his homemade vessel, Big Sea. It's just over a metre or 3 feet 2 inches long. Pictured there. Apologies if you're listening on the radio. The boat is sufficiently compact that Andrew will not be able to stand up when the hatch is down, space at such a premium that food will effectively be moulded into the walls. Andrew Bedwell, who's been testing his boat at sea, joins us now, I think, to talk about it. Andrew, welcome. Why?
Yeah, why is a big question. Personal challenge. I've always been at sea. I've always loved being at sea, and I like pushing boundaries.
And just in terms of, you've built this boat yourself. Sea trials you're conducting pretty much right now. Stability. It's one thing to be in a harbour in our inland waters, but in the midst of a roaring gale in the mid-Atlantic, crikey.
Yeah, it's certainly challenging. The vessel's been designed by a gentleman called Tom McNally, who actually broke the record back in '93. So he's designed it. He broke the record. This boat's been designed completely around my frame. So it's designed to fit me. I can only just fit in it, but I can fit in it. And as you say, the food is going to be moulded in to every nook and cranny around the vessel. And then I shall be in it for probably 60 if it's perfect. In all honesty, it's not going to be perfect the whole way, but potentially we're factoring in up to 90 days at sea.
And during that time, I read, you'll sleep in 20-minute bursts.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of yacht racing anyway, and we do that. It's all solo yacht racing, and I generally sleep 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off continually anyway. That's not the hard bit. The hard bit's being stuck in kind of a roller coaster, in a wheelie bin, in the dark, being rotated. That's the hard bit.
Yeah, nighttime. If things do go wrong, you've got presumably GPS. You can send the flare up digitally. Can you, calling for help?
Yeah. So what we've got is I've got all the technology on board. Everyone will be able to track us at any one point. there is going to be a vessel standing off. We're talking of 24 hours standing off from me. So that will be able to come to me. There's no point in doing it if the vessel's 100 yards off and they could throw me Mars bars, throw me another can of drink. So if you're going to do it properly.
And because there's still time to call this off if you can just regain your senses. So let's reflect on the hazards. Tankers, are they really much of a hazard? Whales, when you're in a boat this small? I mean, what are the big hazards?
The worst scenario is, and this is what we're designing the boat around, is to be caught in maybe a false 10, maybe ships bearing down on us. But what we've got enough technology in the boat to actually ping where we are at any one point. So vessels, as long as they are watching their AIS and their radar, they will pick me up. It's just as long as they're watching. That's the key to it. We've got.
Well, as long as they're watching, because we're watching now some of the pictures, some of your promotional pictures, and the mast and the sails, the yards are tiny. And if you were in, a big swell on the bridge of a supertanker, they're not going to see you.
No, visually, they won't see me. But what we've got is we've got what's called AIS. So it's automatic identification system. So it will be pinging up as a target on their screens, but it will also be pinging up on my screen as well. So I will be able to VHF radio them as well. And as long as they're listening to everything, we're all right. We can do it. We will be making them aware as much as we can of our location as well.
Andrew, sometimes when I've got younger children in the car with me and they're kicking off, and I'll say to them, just take your earbuds out, think some interesting thoughts. You've got 90 days of thinking interesting thoughts. I'm guessing boredom's not going to be a huge problem for you, but how do you tick off the days?
It's one of those things, when I do my solo offshore stuff anyway, and I can be away for 30 days solo, and in fact my last big passage pre-COVID was around Iceland and back, into the Arctic, through past Greenland, but round by side of Greenland. You kind of get your mind into a state of relaxation, and I hopefully not going to have a problem with doing it on this passage. It's obviously a lot smaller, there's a lot less to do, but I've also you've got the sounds of the sea, you've got everything around you to kind of keep you going. I don't think that side of things will be a problem. I'm certainly not taking any music or anything like that. Don't do that.
Andrew, absolute pleasure talking to you, and we wish you all the very best. Good luck.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you.
If your idea of fun is standing in the baking hot sun or pouring rain, unwashed in the middle of a field while sleeping in a tent, all for the sake of music, then Glastonbury is here again. And we're asking, what is the attraction? Some of the revellers arriving at the festival today, and we can listen to what some of them had to say, can we? Well, you've got the pictures anyway. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. Can I just do a little bit of media navel gazing before we get into whether Glastonbury is a good idea and what the weather's like and wellies and mud and all that sort of stuff? We were talking about whether we did this story today, and I was again it, because it's one of those stories that I know 200,000 people go there every year. It's as big as the Cheltenham Festival. It's kind of a big deal. But actually, it's not a news story, is it? It's a lot of middle-class folks standing in a field listening to music. Why is that news?
Well, it's very iconic. I think it's a big tradition here in this country, and a lot of people really enjoy going. It's kind of like, and it hasn't been going since COVID, so this is its big comeback, So, it might not be your cup of tea, but a lot of people really do enjoy, the kind of bohemian, crazy...
Well, Lenny Henry doesn't enjoy it so much. He thinks there's too many white faces when he looks at Glastonbury. Remember that story?
Right. Yes, I remember that story well.
Can we just talk about Andrew Bedwell? Because I think that is a real story. That's a real story, isn't it?
It is.
I mean,
it's
what a glorious
insane.
lunatic. What a glorious lunatic.
Yes, and very well spoken, and it seems he's thought of everything. I did want to ask him about the bathroom situation.
You didn't need to do that.
Well, I just wondered, what's going on? How does that work? And clearly, maybe he doesn't need a shower for 90 days because it's just him.
We could try and get him back on.
It's okay.
I mean,
but I'm thinking logistics here. And he's not even bringing music with him. He's nothing. He likes his solitude. I mean, that is a strong mind.
yeah, he's got a wife and a 9-year-old daughter. They'll be following his progress. There's a bit the sort of journalistic cynic in me wonders whether it's as dangerous as it sounds to lay people like you and I. I think it is.
I think it is.
I think it.
Yeah.
Big whales, big tankers, big waves.
It looks like a canoe.
It's smaller than a canoe. It's a metre wide. It's absolutely tiny. Good on him. I hope we follow his progress.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Michelle Dewberry is coming up next to reflect on the story she's covering today. Hi, Michelle.
Hello. I always join you, Colin, to reflect on my stories, and I end up accidentally reflecting on yours. Instead, I'm sitting there looking at Glastonbury thinking, I wish I was there. No offence, it's nice talking to you as well, but wouldn't it be nice to be at Glastonbury, eh? Anyway, coming up on my show tonight, it's another day and another report, Colin, on yet more failings from yet another police force when it comes to so-called grooming gangs, let's just call it what it is. Maggie Oliver is going to be joining me to talk about that because apparently this is an issue of yesterday as opposed to current day. I'm not so sure that I believe that, actually, Colin. So I'll be talking to Maggie about that. Also, if we're going to have a government, we need an effective opposition. So I'm asking, is the Labour Party that? I'll be talking to Stephen Kinnock about that. And also, you might have seen this, the British Bill of Rights to replace the Human Rights Act. Is this a good idea or not? Campaigners are furious. But then that's kind of the job of campaigners, right? So is it a problem or not?
Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Didn't have Michelle Dewberry down as a Glastonbury girl. You can never tell, Sarah Elliott, can you? You can never tell. We've got 25 seconds left. Just your thoughts on where the rail strike tomorrow. Will it be as bad as Tuesday?
I don't
Where's
think
it going?
so. I think it's going to be maybe a non-story with the way that things actually ran pretty well on Tuesday. And I think a lot of people are using the underground and also taking the moment to work from home.
Well, we'll see. Non-story might be putting it a little extremely. More news coming up. Here's Michelle.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Plenty of fine sunny weather around this evening, but the weather is on the change. Still some hot sunshine tomorrow, but an increasing chance of seeing some thunderstorms and turning more showery generally as we head into the weekend. There is a weak weather front across the far north of Scotland, but actually it's the weather coming in from the south that's going to give us a few problems over the next 48 hours or so. Initially, though, very pleasant out there this evening. Warm, hazy, a balmy summer's evening, if you like. But notice down to the south the threat of some heavy showers across the Channel Isles, and they may well track across the Channel during the early hours. Always the risk of a bit of patchy rain across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, but for most it's a dry night, a pretty warm night. Temperatures in many towns and cities staying in the mid-teens. Another very warm and sunny day to come for many on Thursday. A lot of clouds still across Western Scotland, like today, and Northern Ireland, but it's further south where the cloud is likely to produce some heavy showers, initially across the southeast, but becoming more widespread over England and Wales as we go through the day. Now, not everywhere is going to see these big downpours, but where they do occur, they could cause some problems. Highest temperatures during tomorrow. Northern England, North Midlands, where we could push 30 Celsius. Many other places, though, into the low to mid-20s. But we do have this Met Office yellow warning in place for those thunderstorms. As I said, hit and miss. Not everywhere will see them, but where they do occur, they could cause some disruption. Large hail, gusty winds, a lot of rain falling in a short space of time. Continued likelihood of heavy showers during the course of Thursday night and into Friday. And then out west, we've got these bands of rain starting to push in, and they will bring some wet weather to Northern Ireland. Greater chance again of seeing some heavy showers breaking out during the day across parts of England, across the Midlands and the northeast of England in particular. But the outlook is for the cooler and showery weather in the west to become more dominant. Temperature dropping off on Friday, dropping off further for Saturday.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Coming up on The Mark Stein Show, a new report outlining the serious failings during the Rotherham child sex scandal has been released, but survivor Sammy Woodhouse will be asking why